Hello and welcome to LSAT Logic Applied. I'm your host, Andrew Leahey, an assistant teaching professor of law at Drexel Klein School of Law. This is a short format podcast where I take the tools from LSAT logical reasoning, assumptions, flaws, causation, strength, and weaken, and apply them to real-world claims in the news, science, and public discourse. For those that don't know, the LSAT is the law school admission test, a standardized exam designed to assess logical reasoning, analytical thinking, and reading comprehension for law school applicants. It's a high-stakes test with a unique focus on how arguments work and how they fall apart. The LSAT is owned and administered by the Law School Admission Council, or LSAC. I don't claim any affiliation or ownership. I'm just here to teach the logic. You don't need to be studying for the LSAT to follow along. The point is to learn how to spot weak or incomplete reasoning in everyday life, the same kind of reasoning the LSAT trains you to attack under time pressure. Today's episode looks at a claim scientists have made about the spread of fraudulent academic research. We're not evaluating whether scientific fraud exists. We're evaluating how the argument about its growth is constructed. Here's the background. A recent study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences examines what researchers call paper mills, organized operations that mass produce fraudulent scientific papers. According to the researchers, these networks operate almost like factories. They produce manuscripts containing fabricated data, plagiarized text, or manipulated images. Those papers are then sold to researchers who want to boost their publication record. In some cases, authorship slots themselves are sold. Someone might pay for the first author position on a paper they didn't actually write, simply to improve their academic resume. The study also suggests that brokers and compromised journals help move these papers through the publication process. In extreme cases, fraudsters have even taken control of abandoned journals and used them to publish thousands of questionable papers. The researchers described this as a coordinated ecosystem designed to exploit weaknesses in academic publishing. And the study includes a striking warning. According to the researchers, fraudulent studies may now be appearing at a faster rate than legitimate scientific publications, which leads to an alarming implication. If fake research is spreading faster than real science, the integrity of scientific literature could eventually be threatened. So let's step back and apply some LSAT logic, because the key question is not whether fraudulent research exists. The question is whether the reasoning behind that claim actually supports the conclusion. So let's start with a breakdown of the claim. The structure of the argument looks something like this. Researchers identify networks producing fraudulent academic papers. They observe that the number of detected fraudulent papers is growing rapidly. They conclude that fraudulent studies may now be appearing faster than legitimate scientific publications, and the implied concern is clear. If fake research is growing faster than real research, the scientific literature could eventually become unreliable. At first glance, that sounds alarming, but on the LSAT, this kind of reasoning raises an immediate question, because the claim hinges on a comparison about growth rates, and growth rates can be misleading. Let's use an LSAT lens for the claim. Let's look at the rate versus quantity confusion. The key phrase in the argument is that fraudulent studies are appearing, quote, faster than legitimate ones. But faster can mean several different things. It could mean there are more fake papers than real papers, or it could mean fake papers are growing at a faster rate, even if they remain a small fraction of the total. Those are very different claims. To see why, imagine a simplified example. Suppose in 1 year, the world produces 1 million legitimate scientific papers and 1,000 fraudulent ones. Now imagine that 5 years later, legitimate publications rise to 1,100,000, a 10% increase. But fraudulent papers rise from 1,000 to 10,000. That's a 900% increase. In that scenario, fake papers are growing much faster than real papers, but they still make up less than 1% of the total scientific literature. So the phrase growing faster can sound alarming even when the underlying numbers remain relatively small. On the LSAT, this kind of reasoning is a classic issue. An argument points to a faster growth rate and suggests that something will soon dominate the system. But that conclusion only follows if the quantities involved are actually comparable, and if the growth continues indefinitely. Neither assumption is necessarily established here. If we wanted to strengthen the researcher's argument, what additional evidence would help? The LSAT gives us a checklist. We would want to know what percentage of total scientific publications are estimated to be fraudulent, whether that percentage is actually increasing over time, whether fraudulent papers are approaching a scale that could meaningfully distort the scientific literature, and whether the systems designed to detect fraud, like retractions and editorial screening, are keeping pace with the problem. Evidence showing that fraudulent papers represent a growing and significant share of total publications would make the argument much stronger. Without that information, the claim about faster growth remains suggestive but incomplete. This episode isn't really about paper mills. It's about how statistics and comparisons are used in arguments. When someone says a problem is growing faster than something else, the LSAT mindset immediately asks a few questions. Faster relative to what? Faster from what starting point? And does a higher growth rate actually imply the problem will dominate the system? Growth rates can make small numbers look dramatic, and when arguments rely on those comparisons without providing context, they can create conclusions that the underlying data doesn't necessarily support. Learning to spot that kind of reasoning gap is exactly what the LSAT is designed to test. And with that, I thank you for listening to LSAT Logic Applied. If you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe for more short episodes where we apply clean logic to messy real-world claims. See you next time.